14th is next Thursday. So I would be taking classes till 12th, which is Tuesday. After which on 14th we will have the next the second midterm. Now I want to give you guys the option. If you feel that 14th is a little too close and you want a little bit more time to prepare, then we can have it on the next Tuesday, which will probably be 19th or something. Yes, 19th. So, but formally we may or may not be. I'm not permitted to do that because the last day for teaching is I think 15th or some such thing. So I just wanted to get your views. If you feel that you prefer to have it on 19th because it may give you a little bit more time, then we shall do it. So what is it? Can some of you speak up and let me know? Hello.
Sir, actually already 19 some exams are there because earlier this was on 26th January holiday. So they shifted to 19. I don't know actually, sir, our exams not there, but other people's may have. They actually, yeah, because they started from 20th onwards, but 26th holiday was there. That's why they have shifted. Whole holiday is there. That's why they have shifted on 19. Whatever exam on 26th, na. So
Okay. So in that case, we will have it. It seems that there is at least one person who has problems. So we will have it exactly on 14th as we discussed. And the second point is this Thursday or Friday. Once again, I will send one more homework, and that would be the last homework number 9, and that would be due, before the exam, before our exam. I think our exam would be on 28th or something, January 28th or something like that, 28th or 29th. I'm not sure. It will be due before that. So just wanted to inform you. So with these comments, let me just share the projector.
Sir, hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, can it be shifted to 15th or 16th?
15th or 16th is also okay with me. I mean, I have. Oh no, wait a minute. 15th, yeah, that is okay with me.
Saturday.
I have no issues. It's perfectly fine. If everybody is okay with it, I have no issues. If that will give you more time, that's it is in your interest that I said 19th. But is everybody okay with okay, 15th is Friday, 16th is Saturday. So is everybody okay with 16th?
Yes, sir, 16th okay.
Okay, then we shall okay, we shall freeze it for 16th. Okay, I will just send an email also about this in that case. Okay, so can all of you see my sheet of paper? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So the topic for today's lecture is Nyquist plots and Bode plots.
Hello, sir. Sir, I have one request.
Yes.
The due date for the assignment 7th is 6th. Sir, can it be extended at least for 2 days?
Okay, sure. So we can make it due on Monday if you want. Okay, it was due tomorrow, is it? Or it was due Wednesday. We can make it due on Monday. Monday is 11th. Is that fine?
Yes, sir. Yes.
But then the due date for the other one is going to be 15th. Is it that still okay? Is it the other homework?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, fine.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Nyquist and Bode plots. Okay, so let us briefly recap what we discussed in the previous lecture. So first we looked at the Fourier transforms of some common signals. Okay, then we looked at the real reason why we are interested in Fourier transforms in the first place, namely that the Fourier transform of a convolution of two signals is the Fourier transform is a product of their Fourier transforms. And then we had this very nice interpretation of a linear dynamic system as a frequency content amplifier. but the gain of that amplifier is itself dependent on frequency. Okay, so a linear dynamic system can be viewed as a frequency dependent frequency content amplifier. Okay, then we discussed how this interpretation is very useful because it helps us to quantitatively or it helps us to come up with quantitative estimates of the extent by which we can reject disturbances or track references. And we looked at how we can, if our controller was a simple proportional controller of gain K1, and I wanted a disturbance rejection of 100 or some such thing, then I can choose the gain K1 to be 100 by minimum value of the magnitude of G of j omega in that particular frequency range, where omega is between omega lower and omega upper. Right? So we can do that, and then at some at other frequencies apart from the one where the gain assumes its minimum value, the amount of attenuation will be larger than a factor of 100, which is something that we need not complain about. So if it gets suppressed at least by a factor of 100, then we are already we have already met our design requirements. So we don't need to exactly suppress it by a factor of 100, right? So then we discussed how, despite the enormous usefulness of Fourier transforms, there still exist a few signals for which Fourier transforms cannot be defined because they're not square integrable. So we introduced Laplace transforms, which are essentially Fourier transforms of weighted signals. So you weigh a particular signal which is not square integrable with a decreasing exponential to make it square integrable, and then you take the Fourier transform of that, and then you massage that equation, shake it a little bit, and so on and so forth, and you end up with, lo and behold, you get the Laplace transform. Okay, then we in connection with Laplace transform, we quickly went over many of the properties and properties that you would have come across already in your undergrad. So we talked about region of convergence, then Laplace transform of a derivative, which was very important for us to obtain the structure of a transfer function, derivative of a signal, then the structure of a transfer function as the ratio of two polynomials, and the zeros of the denominator polynomial were called the poles of the transfer function, and the zeros of the numerator polynomial were called as the zeros of the transfer function. And then we talked about the initial and final value theorems. Okay, so now we are going to slowly, in today's lecture and the lecture that follows this, we will briefly look at how we can execute control design using the tools that we have picked up. So what must have been clear to you in the previous lecture is that, unlike state space based formulation, in frequency domain, quantitative rejection of disturbances or robustness to planned parameter variations is possible. Okay, as long as systems are linear, we can represent them in the frequency domain, and then we can undertake the kind of design that we discussed in the previous lecture roughly, and get predictable quantitative extents of rejection of disturbances or robustness to changes in planned parameters. But before any control system can satisfy performance, it first has to be stabilized. So for example, here we have come up with this particular gain, which is necessary for us to reject disturbance by a factor of 100. But suppose I want to incorporate this gain in a feedback system. So there is a gain K1, and there is the plant G, and then there is a feedback system, wrapping around it. Okay, so this is the error, this is the reference. Maybe there's a disturbance that needed to be rejected or whatever. I add that at the output, etc. Okay, this is the output Y. Okay, so this is the feedback system. What is the transfer function from the output to the reference? So Y of S divided by R of S is equal to K1 times G of S divided by 1 plus K1 times G of S. So we did this derivation for a slightly simpler case earlier, but the same approach can be adopted even here. And or maybe I can write Y of S as this times R of S plus 1 by 1 plus K1 times G of S times the disturbance transfer function, the disturbance Laplace transform D of S. Okay, I can write it this way. Now, in order for my closed loop system to be stable, I have this particular transfer function in the denominator, 1 plus K1 times G of S. Okay, all of the zeros of this particular transfer function will be the poles of my closed loop system, because the zeros of 1 plus K1 times G will appear in the denominator of the overall transfer function, both between output and reference as well as between output and disturbance. And therefore, if all of these zeros are on the left half of the complex plane, then I can be reassured that in my enthusiasm to reject disturbances in a quantifiable manner or achieve robustness in a quantifiable manner, I have not completely forgotten an even more important obligation on my part, namely to make sure that my control system is stable. Without stability, there is no point talking about performance. Okay, so this once again brings back this contrast between state space based pole placement and pole placement based feedback and the present strategy of output feedback in the frequency domain, analysis of systems using the frequency domain. Okay, so if you looked at that discussion in connection with state space, what you saw was that I could very clearly set the feedback gains, that feedback vector K1 times X, the elements of that vector could be very clearly chosen in order to place the closed loop poles of either the error dynamics or of the plant itself or of the closed loop system wherever I wanted them to be placed. So I could, if you tell me where all you want the poles to be situated, I could give you with a very simple algebraic expression, by computing a simple algebraic expression, the gains K for the feedback for the state feedback that you need to place the poles at those locations. So that was the advantage with that formulation. The disadvantage, however, as we discussed several times, was its inability to quantify the extent by which a disturbance gets rejected or the extent by which we could achieve robustness by appropriate design of the controller. Now, it would be particularly tragic if the frequency domain based problem formulation gave us one advantage at the expense of the other. It would be particularly tragic if we were unable to judge under what conditions 1 plus K1 times G would have all its zeros on the left half of the complex plane and under what conditions it would not. So as good and as attractive as the frequency domain tools are, one must remember that they will remain incomplete as design tools unless they also address the issue of stability. So the reason we shifted from state space to frequency domain was because we were satisfied with stability, but not with performance engineering. Here, we have clearly seen how performance engineering can be obtained in a transparent manner, but stability engineering should also be possible. Otherwise, we are going to make an even bigger mistake, by using this, by adopting frequency domain based design techniques. Okay. Fortunately, however, it turns out that it is possible to ascertain the stability of the closed loop system, or in other words, ascertain that the zeros of the denominator transfer function 1 plus K times G of S are all on the left half of the complex plane. Okay, and that is the topic of today's discussion. In fact, not only can you ascertain that they are all on the left half of the complex plane, but you can come up with a very transparent way of doing the design where you play around like you play with Lego blocks or some other building blocks. You can play around with the controller structure, all the time keeping track simultaneously about what this controller structure is doing to the performance specifications, or how is it helping from the point of view of performance engineering, and at the same time what is it doing to the stability of the closed loop system. They can both be viewed in a very transparent manner, and the tool that allows both to be kept track of simultaneously is the Bode plot. We will discuss what they are in today's lecture. I'm assuming again that all of you have come across Nyquist plots and Bode plots in your undergrad. We'll just go over them for the sake of completeness. Okay. In the next lecture, we will take an actual concrete example and look at how one can synthesize a controller by using these plots, using these tools that are available to us in the frequency domain. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay. So let us get started with Nyquist plots. Okay. So Nyquist plots find their relevance as a consequence of the more general Nyquist stability theory. Okay, and I will once again, in a manner that I discussed Lagrangian formalism, namely as I just handed it down to you without too much of a motivation and too much of first principles based derivation. So too will I discuss Nyquist stability theory in a top-down manner. So I view it primarily as a tool for ascertaining the stability of the closed loop system. There are elaborate proofs, you can use Cauchy's theorem to prove it and so on and so forth, but that's outside the scope of this course and it's not really necessary. So if you simply, just as you could simply view the Lagrangian machinery as just a tool to get the dynamics and not worry about how those equations came to be in the first place, so too can you use Nyquist stability theory as a tool to ascertain stability without worrying too much about how the guidelines of the stability theory actually can be proved in practice. In fact, I teach one other course where I get into greater details about the Nyquist stability theory. Here, however, suffice it to introduce it just in the form of a test, okay, without too much mathematical proof. Okay, so the first concept that one would look at when we talk about stability of the feedback system is to look at the complex plane. Okay, this is the real part of S, this is the imaginary part of S. Okay, we want all our closed loop poles to be on the left half of the complex plane so that our systems are stable, so that the modes are all decreasing exponentials. None of them are increasing exponentials. Now, how does Nyquist stability theory help us ascertain that? So we have the transfer function. So let me draw the feedback system that we have taken so far. Okay, we will modify it as time progresses. We have a system that we want to control, and we'll call that system's transfer function P of S. So a general transfer function is labeled as G of S, and a system that we are trying to control, we shall call it P of S. That's a transfer function. And then we have a controller gain K1 cascaded with it. And then we have feedback wrapped around the plant. So there's a reference R, and there is this error that is amplified by this gain K1. So this is the feedback system that we are looking at. And we want to be sure that the zeros of the closed loop transfer function of this feedback system, which will be the zeros of this K1 times P of S, are all on the left half of the complex plane. This is the task that is that we are expected to address. Okay. Now, the first thing to do is to define what is known as a contour, a closed contour. Okay, you take a closed contour that encompasses the entire of the right half of the complex plane. Okay, typically the contour is taken to be a D-shaped contour, and the right half of the complex plane therefore starts with the imaginary axis. It's bounded by the imaginary axis on one end, and it extends out, right? So this semicircle has a radius r which is tended to infinity. Okay, this is called as a closed contour because it's a D, it's closed. Okay, see, Now, Nyquist stability theory says this. Let us say we compute this term here, K1 times P of S, for all values S on this contour, only on this contour. Okay. So this is, let me say, this is some value of S on the contour. I plug in that value of S in this expression and compute what K1 times P is. I do that for every single value of S. Okay. So for values of S which are on this D-shaped contour, S will be of the kind R e to the power j theta, where theta is this angle, right? And R is the radius which is tended to infinity. So S is a value which is very large in magnitude, and its phase is dependent on where we are on this D contour. Okay. So this is, let us call this C2, so one segment of the contour. There's one other segment which is C1, which is the imaginary axis. So on the imaginary axis, S is of the kind S is equal to j omega. Okay, it's an imaginary number, not necessarily very large, although for large omega it can become large, but it will go all the way past 0 and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is the T contour. So what is done is one computes K1 times P of S for all points S on this D contour, and one plots the real value of this transfer function K1 times P of S versus the imaginary value of K1 times P of S. Okay, for all values S on this closed contour. Now this curve, it turns out, will have a certain shape. Okay, usually it can be shown that it is symmetric about the real axis. Okay, now we count the number of encirclements of this curve of the point -1. Clockwise, if you're negotiating this curve in the clockwise sense, in other words, you're systematically taking points along the vertical from 0, omega equal to 0 to omega equal to infinity, and from there walking along this D, coming down to omega equal to minus infinity and coming back up. So you have traversed this curve in the clockwise sense. Okay, then you will also, therefore this curve will also be the corresponding mapping will also get traversed in a clockwise sense. And the rule for establishing the stability or the lack thereof is the following. Okay, so the number of encirclements of the point -1 okay is equal to the difference between the number of closed loop poles, okay, which are called as Z, okay, which is number of closed loop poles, which are also the zeros of the denominator transfer function 1 plus K1 times P, number of closed loop poles within the contour minus the number of open loop poles within the contour, that is called as P. Okay, so this is Nyquist stability criterion, as it is called. Okay, because it gives us a graphical way of verifying whether the closed loop system is going to be stable or not. See, here what is it that is making this problem so difficult? You see, the plant P of S has a certain set of poles. Those are the open loop poles. But the open loop poles of a system need not bear any resemblance whatsoever to its closed loop poles. So adding just this one extra term of +1 can completely mess up the zeros of this transfer function. The zeros of this transfer function need not look anything at all like the zeros of P of S or the poles of P of S. Okay, so they can be completely different, and there is no straightforward way of guessing where the closed loop poles are going to be. Okay, in fact, you can show that for plants whose denominator polynomials are greater than or equal to 5, you don't have a closed form solution even. You have to solve the problem numerically to tell where the closed loop poles are, or in other words, where the zeros of 1 plus k1 times p are. Okay, so I want to caution you again. I will be using these words poles and zeros in an interchangeable manner. So sometimes it can be confusing, but I beg for your forgiveness, because it sometimes makes sense for me to talk about closed loop poles. But you need to remember that the closed loop poles are no different from the zeros of this particular transfer function, 1 plus k1 times p of s. Okay. So this is the criterion. And now let us, any questions about this criterion? As I said, I have introduced it in a top-down manner. I have not talked about how this criterion was arrived at. It is just that if you compute p of s, if you know p of s and you know the gain k1, then you can compute k1 times p. Although you cannot compute the roots of or the zeros of 1 plus k1 times p, you can definitely compute k1 times p. And what Nyquist gave as a gift to us is just with this one information, we can tell you whether 1 plus k1 times p has its zeros on the right half plane or not. Okay, you need to remember that Nyquist is not telling you where exactly they are located. He is not telling you it is located at s is equal to -3 or +3 or +5 or some such thing if the closed loop system is unstable. That information is not given to you by Nyquist plots. It will only tell you whether there are any poles of the closed loop system on the right half of the complex plane. That's all. Okay, where they are is not known. Even where the stable poles are also not known. Okay, it's just that it's a test to confirm that there are no closed loop poles on the right half of the complex plane. Okay, but that is adequate for us. We do not really care where exactly the closed loop poles are on the right half, if they are on the right half, right? It's bad news for us no matter where they are. It doesn't matter where exactly they are sitting. So it's of paramount importance for us to avoid designing our feedback system such that the closed loop poles inadvertently walk into the right half of the complex plane. So this is therefore a very useful test, despite the fact that it doesn't give us all the information that we might desire, namely exactly where these poles are located and so on. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, so let us, to become familiar with this tool, let us take some numerical examples and draw Nyquist plots for these systems. Okay, so the first example is p of s is equal to 1 by s plus 1. And I'm assuming that my controller gain k1 has not been designed yet. In fact, it will not even remain a simple gain k1 for after we are done looking at Nyquist plots and so on. So for the moment, let us just assume k1 is 1, and therefore we focus only on the on the Nyquist plot of the plant. Okay, so p of s is equal to 1 by s plus 1. Yeah, Subhadeep Sahu has a question.
Hello, sir. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Subhadeep. Please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Sir, that -1 term, so that I do not understand. That why -1 term?
Well, I cannot answer it in all its detail for similar reasons. Why I cannot tell you why why the structure of a Lagrangian for the Euler-Lagrange equation is the way it is. Okay, there is a certain mathematical derivation associated with it. The motivation comes from this particular transfer function 1 plus k1 times p. So it turns out that if the transfer function 1 plus k1 times p encircles the origin, okay, in the p of in the real part of this transfer function versus the imaginary part of the transfer function plot, then the system is unstable. The closed loop system is unstable, or in other words, some of the poles of the closed loop system will be on the right half of the complex plane. That is the actual condition. That's what mathematicians would tell you. Give me this transfer function, okay, then I will find out, I will draw the Nyquist plot and see whether it's encircling the origin or not. Okay, but to us engineers, if I have experimentally obtained p of s somehow, then it is one extra step for me to compute 1 plus k1 times p of s. Okay, I don't want to do that. So rather than looking at the encirclement of the origin for the transfer function 1 plus k1 times p of s, when the values of s are allowed to assume when s assumes values on this d-shaped contour, instead of doing that, I just look at the encirclement of the point -1. Instead of looking at the encirclement of the origin of this particular transfer function, I just go to a different plane, namely just k1 times p plane, and in that plane I just look at the encirclement of the point -1. So at this point, this is all that I can give you as an answer. Now, why does the encirclement of the origin of 1 plus k1 times p signal the instability of the closed loop system? For that, you need to understand the mathematical proof for Nyquist stability theory, which at the moment we consider to be outside the scope of this course. Okay.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir. And one more thing, that S equals to j omega you have written.
Correct.
Sir, why you have written that? I cannot follow.
No, we are allowing S to assume values on the D-shaped contour. Now, where are the what does the D-shaped contour embrace? One, the vertical segment of the D-shaped contour is coincident with the imaginary axis, right? And the D shape is going to project out into the right half of the complex plane, the semicircle, right? So on the semicircle, the values of S would assume this particular form, r e to the power j theta, where theta goes from plus pi by 2 to minus pi by 2, right? Or minus pi by 2 to plus pi by 2, sorry. And on the imaginary axis, the value of S is going to be a purely imaginary number. Okay, r e to the power j theta has a real part as well as a imaginary part. Whereas on the imaginary axis, by definition, S has to be an imaginary number. And we therefore, we therefore set S is equal to j times omega, where omega is some general frequency. That's it.
Yes, sir. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So P of S is equal to 1 by S plus 1. Now we have to plot the, real part of P of S and the imaginary part of versus imaginary part of P of S. I think in your undergrad, you might have been introduced to Nyquist plot as a polar plot. That is also an acceptable way of looking at things. Which we shall, view in a little while. So we first, we start from this point. We start from the origin, go towards omega equal to infinity. Okay, so that's the first leg of our journey. And in doing that, we see what values P of S assumes. So when I substitute S is equal to j omega, then P of S will be equal to P of 1 by j omega plus 1. Now this complex number has a magnitude which is 1 plus omega square under root, and a phase which is e to the power minus j tan inverse of omega by 1. That's the phase. Okay. So as omega goes from 0 to infinity, which is the first leg of our S-shaped or D-shaped contour, how will P of S change as function of S? So at omega equal to 0, you can just look at this equation. At omega equal to 0, the phase is 0 and the magnitude is 1. Okay. And as omega tends to infinity, you see that the magnitude goes to 0. Okay. And the phase goes to minus j tan inverse of infinity. Tan inverse of infinity is pi by 2. So phase goes to minus pi by 2. So it turns out that the graph looks something like this. It looked exactly like a semicircle, although the semicircular nature of the graph is a coincidence. Okay. In general, Nyquist plots are not simple curves. Then comes the D-shaped contour. We are right now here at omega equal to infinity, and we have to negotiate the D-shaped contour. Okay. Now on the D-shaped contour, P of S will assume the form 1 by r e power j phi plus 1, right? Because S is of the form r e power j phi. But in the limit r tends to infinity, what can we say about this value? 1 by r e power j phi plus 1. Do you agree with me that this value tends to 0? Of course, there will be a certain phi. That phi might change from plus pi by 2 to minus pi by 2 or whatever. But the entire complex number is weighted down by this magnitude r. and that r is tending to infinity, so the p of s will go to 0, right? So for every point on this D-shaped contour, that every point collapses, gets mapped to a single point in the p of s plane, and that is the origin of the p of s plane. Any questions so far? So the entire D-shaped contour gets mapped to this origin, and then comes the third leg of our journey. We start from minus j infinity and come back to 0. So we travel, walk along the imaginary axis once again from a negative infinite angle, negative infinite frequency back to 0, and that gets us to walk into this particular part of that p of s plane, and the overall Nyquist plot looks something like that. Okay. So if I take any, so omega is not directly plotted here. Okay. So this is omega equal to 0. Okay. And as omega increases, the real part versus imaginary part goes along this curve. So therefore omega has to be graduated along this particular curve. Okay. And this is around omega equal to plus infinity. Omega equal to minus infinity is just around there somewhere. And then once again, for negative values of omega, the curve goes that way and finally comes back, and at omega close to omega equal to 0, it comes back and joins the first curve. Okay. So this is the Nyquist plot for the transfer function 1 by s plus 1. Now we apply the test. Okay. Is this encircling the point minus 1 or not? And if you see here, it is clearly not encircling the point minus 1, right? It is somewhere farther away. So if you apply that Nyquist test of number of encirclements is equal to z minus p, number of encirclements is 0. Okay. And z is the number of closed loop poles which we have to determine if this is the transfer function that we have for our feedback system of our plant. Sorry. And then the number of closed loop poles. Okay. If you look at this, where is the pole of this transfer function? It's at s is equal to minus 1. And the open loop pole, therefore, is a stable pole, right? The open loop system P of s is a stable system. So therefore, the number of the number of open loop poles on the right half of the complex plane are also 0. And therefore, what we conclude is that the number of closed loop poles is 0. Or in other words, our closed loop system will be stable all times for regardless of the gain k1 that we pick here. Okay. Any questions so far about how to draw a Nyquist plot and so on? Okay. So let us take some other examples to further illustrate how one can draw Nyquist plots. This time we will take a slightly more tricky example. So g of s or p of s, sorry, is equal to 1 by s times s plus 1. Okay. So this is the transfer function of our system. So what does this mean, by the way? If this is a transfer function, then the equation is s square times p of s. Sorry. What is p of s? P of s by definition is the output divided by the input, right? So the relation therefore will be s square times y plus s times y is equal to capital U of s. If I take the Laplace inverse of this, s square y's Laplace inverse is y double dot, and the Laplace inverse of s times y is y dot, and the Laplace inverse of capital U is small u. So this is going to be the time domain differential equation for the physical system that we are concerned with, and the corresponding transfer function is this. So we have to obtain the we have to plot the Nyquist plot for this. Okay. So here you see there's a small problem with plotting the Nyquist plot by following the rules that we have put down so far. And that problem is that this open loop system has a pole at the origin. Okay. S is equal to 0 is on the imaginary axis and is therefore on that path, on that footpath that we need to traverse, the D-shaped footpath that we need to traverse in order to assess the stability of the closed loop system. Okay. And if I were to sit exactly at that point, then my P of S by definition will go to infinity, will blow up. and therefore I will not be able to judge whether this encircles the origin properly or not. Okay, so this is a problem that we need to somehow solve. So the way we solve it is to slightly modify the contour itself. So when we approach this particular location where the open loop system is singular, or the open loop system blows up, has its zeros, it has its pole at, we introduce a tiny kink, a semicircular kink around that region, so that we avoid that particular region. Okay, and then execute a D-shaped contour. Now what the Nyquist test will tell you is whether the closed loop poles are located in this part of the region or not, excluding that particular point. But in the limit that the radius of this small semicircle R is tended to 0, okay, we will still be able to confirm by and large whether there are any closed loop poles on the entire of the right half of the complex plane. Right now, we can ascertain whether the closed loop poles are there in this region of the complex plane, which is the entire of the region minus the tiny semicircle there, right? But in the limit the semicircle's radius is tended to 0, it will approach. We can extend this test to include the entire of the right half of the complex plane. Okay. Any questions about the introduction of this tiny kink to avoid the singularity? Okay. So let us go forward then. So we let us say start at this point. Okay, at earlier we started omega equal to 0, but we now started omega equal to small r, where r is tended to 0. Okay, so then P of S will be equal to 1 by J small r times J small r plus 1, right, to start with. But in the limit that r is tended to 0, what will happen? This is real part of P versus imaginary part of P. This J small r plus 1 will be approximately equal to 1 itself, and this J small r will have a phase of minus 90 degrees, because 1 by Jr can be written as 1 by r times e to the power minus j pi by 2. Okay, so the phase will be minus 90 degrees. So we will start somewhere here. Okay, this angle is, so this complex number has an angle of minus pi by 2 roughly. Okay, now as omega increases, okay, then I just substitute this as j omega, and then I see how the magnitude and the phases change. It turns out that as omega tends to omega tends to plus infinity, this term 1 by j omega contributes to a phase of minus pi by 2, and the other term 1 by j omega plus 1 will also contribute to another phase of minus pi by 2 as omega tends to infinity. So therefore together they contribute to a total phase of minus pi. And as again omega is tended to infinity, the magnitude of this transfer function also goes to 0. So if I were to plot it taking into account these guidelines, of course you cannot imagine ahead of time how it might look, because this is a complicated curve, but with experience you can guess how it might look like. So it will look something like this. Okay, and once again all the points on this D-shaped contour will collapse to the origin, because for every point on that, both these terms will be infinitely large, and therefore 1 by the product of such infinitely large terms will go to 0. So the entire set of points on this D-shaped contour will collapse to the origin. Now we have to traverse along this other path from minus infinity to 0, or minus infinity to small r, and that will result in a curve that looks something like that. Okay, and the last segment that we need to traverse is this particular curve here. Okay, so what is the value of S on that particular curve? Do you agree with me that S will be of the kind S is equal to r e power j phi? So let me zoom in around that curve. Okay, this is the radius small r. Okay, so we are somewhere here. By the time we reach that location there, we are somewhere here. Okay, then we need to traverse this curve in this particular direction. Okay, so what will our angle phi change? It will change from minus pi by 2 all the way to pi by 2. Okay, so we substitute P of S is equal to 1 by r e power j phi times r e power j phi plus 1. Okay, where phi is allowed to assume values starting from minus pi by 2, it ends at pi by 2. Okay, how will this look? You see that when r is very small, r e power j phi plus 1 is roughly going to be equal to 1 itself, because this number is very, very small, vanishingly small. So for all practical purposes, this is the term that's going to dominate the overall value of P of S. Now 1 over r, when in the limit small r tending to 0, will tend to infinity. Okay, and e power j phi is in the denominator, so P of S therefore will approximately be equal to 1 over r e power minus j phi. Right? So in the limit that r tends to 0, this guy tends to infinity. So the P of S will be infinitely large in magnitude, and e power minus j phi, will assume values from plus pi by 2 to minus pi by 2, right? Because there's a minus phi here. The angle will be multiplied with minus 1. So therefore, we can complete starting from plus pi by 2. So this angle is plus pi by 2, right? So starting from somewhere here near infinity, we draw a semicircle. So the radius is 1 over r, and then join it here. So this is going to be the Nyquist plot for this particular transfer function. And if you see here, the point minus 1 is comfortably outside this curve, and therefore the system is stable. Because if you apply Nyquist criterion, n is equal to z minus p. So number of encirclements is 0, as can be seen from this curve here, and the number of closed loop poles, open loop poles on the right half of the complex plane are also 0. Our system has its poles at s is equal to 0 and s is equal to minus 1. Neither of them are on the right half of the complex plane. So that's also 0. And therefore, the number of closed loop poles will also be 0. Any questions about this? Okay. Yes, Subhadeep Sahu has a question.
Yes, sir. Sir, from the earlier theory, it has to be the poles has to be inside the D-shaped contour. But but in this case, we have just modified that contour. So can it be allowed?
Well, what is the difference between that contour and this contour? That's the first thing that you need to look at. The only difference is that this contour avoids a small region near the origin, right? That small semicircular region near the origin alone is avoided by this contour. So this therefore tells me whether the closed loop poles are inside this D contour, this particular contour, or not. But so what it cannot tell me therefore is whether there are any closed loop poles outside of this D contour but still inside the right half of the complex plane. So that is basically the area that is inside this tiny semicircle, right? That I cannot judge by using this contour. How do I fix that problem? I fix that problem by tending small r to 0. Okay, so since small r is tended to 0, the difference in the area between that covered by this weird shaped contour and the entire of the right half of the complex plane becomes vanishingly small. So I can more or less guarantee to you that there are no closed loop poles on the right half of the complex plane. Okay, so the difference between the D-shaped contour that we assumed earlier and the D-shaped contour and a slightly modified D-shaped contour we are assuming here is vanishingly small, and therefore with confidence I can claim that there are no closed loop poles on the right half of the complex plane even in this particular case. Okay.
Okay, sir. And sir, if there is some other poles like let's say plus or minus 1 j omega, means j plus or minus. So then in that case also we can do the same thing, means doing some little variation.
That's a very good point. So if the open loop system has poles on the imaginary axis other than at the origin, what do we do? That is your question, right? It's exactly the same surgery that we have done here. We introduce a tiny kink to avoid that point, both on the top half and the bottom half, and then compute P of S for all values of S along this slightly modified D contour. Okay.
Yes, sir. And also this is true for the right that D-shaped contour also, means in the boundary of the D-shaped contour also.
I didn't get you. What do you mean by this is true for this one? This one here, is it?
Yes, sir.
Yes, it is true. It is true. It is a general statement. But this contour is, the points are very far away, right? So they don't really matter in the analysis.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir.
So Rajpal Singh also has a question.
Sir, could you please repeat how the Nyquist plot was drawn for the smaller semicircle?
Yeah. So for a smaller semicircle, this is a smaller semicircle. I take some point S. So what is the expression for that point? It will be of this particular kind. This is equal to R e power j phi, where phi assumes values because I'm traversing this entire D-shaped contour in the clockwise sense. This smaller d is going to be walked in this particular direction. What that means is that I start with my phi being close to minus pi by 2 and I end with phi being equal to plus pi by 2. So that's the manner in which phi is going to change as I walk along this small d-shaped contour. So I need to compute P of S for all points S on this small d-shaped contour. So I just substitute the expression for S in the expression for P of S, and that's going to be this term here. Now here, I have 1 plus a small number, a vanishingly small number, right? Because small r is tended to 0. So therefore, this term here will very nearly be equal to 1 itself, right? So for all practical purposes, P of S is approximately going to be the same equal to 1 over r e power minus j phi, right? And in the limit that small r is tended to 0, 1 over r, which is the magnitude of this complex number P of S, goes to infinity. And what about the phase of this complex number? We saw that the complex number S, the phase of that complex number S goes from minus pi by 2 to plus pi by 2 as we walk along this D-shaped contour. So what happens to the phase of P of S? We see that the phase of P of S is minus phi, the negative of the phase of S. And therefore, the phase of P of S goes from plus pi by 2 to minus pi by 2 instead of when the phase of S goes from minus pi by 2 to plus pi. It will be the opposite of the phase, the manner in which the phase of S itself changes. And that is enough information for me to obtain the value of P of S for all values of S on this D-shaped contour. So for the S value of S is somewhere here, the corresponding value of P of S is somewhere there. The phase is plus pi by 2 and the magnitude is close to infinity. And as the phase changes from minus pi by 2 to plus pi by 2, the phase of S goes from minus pi by 2 to plus pi by 2. The phase of P of S goes from plus pi by 2 to minus pi by 2. And it moves along a semicircular arc of radius 1 over r, 1 over small r, which is infinitely large, and then finally comes here. Okay, is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Abhishek Panchal has a question.
Sir, we draw the infinite circle on the left half. What ensures that we draw is the left side, not on the right side?
We do a semi. Oh, you mean this one?
No, sir. This P of S. For a smaller radius r tends to infinity, then we draw from infinity to minus infinity of the left side.
You mean if we draw it like this, is it?
No, sir. No, sir. The other diagram, the Nyquist plot.
This one. No, this one here.
Yes, sir.
How can you do that? The phase of this, you cannot draw it. You want to draw it like this instead on the left hand side.
It's also pi by 2 to minus pi by 2 of
No, it is not pi by 2 to minus pi by 2. It's pi by 2. It increases, right? It's pi by 2, and then for some point here it's greater than pi by 2, and at that point here it's plus pi, and then it doesn't go from pi by 2 to minus pi by 2. In that case, it goes from pi by 2 to 3 pi by 2.
Okay, sir.
Okay, it's not going from pi by 2 to minus pi by 2. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. So then 2 other examples, I will quickly draw them just to make you familiar with drawing Nyquist plots. So the other example is P of S is equal to 1 by S minus 2. Okay. So this is a slightly interesting example because it is open loop unstable. So my open loop pole is at S is equal to plus 2. So my system is unstable. So what is the Nyquist plot look like? So at omega, again, for everywhere on the D-shaped contour, P of S will be equal to 0. At omega equal to 0, the value of P of S is 1 over minus 0.5. Okay, so you can show that this guy encircles, this goes in this particular direction. Okay, as omega goes from 0 to infinity, p of j omega goes along that particular curve, and along the negative imaginary axis it comes back this way, and this point avoids the point -1. Okay, so you might think, well, it's not encircling the point -1, and so far in all the examples, no encirclement of the point -1 is synonymous with stability of the feedback system, of the closed loop system. So perhaps even in this case also, for this particular situation, the closed loop system would be stable. But you have to apply the rules of Nyquist stability theory correctly. So the number of encirclements is equal to the number of closed loop poles minus the number of open loop poles. In this particular case, we see that the number of encirclements is 0. So this Nyquist counter is not, sorry, this Nyquist plot is not encircling the point -1. The number of open loop unstable poles, or the poles on the right half of the complex plane, however, is 1. Right? So the rule for making sure that z is equal to 0 is that n should be equal to -1. Or in other words, there should be one counterclockwise encirclement of the point -1 for the system to be stable in this particular case. Otherwise, in this particular scenario, our z will be equal to 1. Or in other words, there will be one closed loop pole on the left half of the complex, on the right half of the complex plane. Is this so difficult to see? Actually not. See, if you compute the closed loop transfer function for this thing, it's going to be p of s divided by 1 plus p of s. Right? What will that be? It's going to be 1 by s minus 2 divided by 1 plus 1 by s minus 2. And you see that this is going to be equal to 1 by s minus 2 plus 1 by s minus 2 times s minus 2. So this s minus 2 gets cancelled, and I get this to be 1 by s minus 1. So it is unstable, right? So therefore, you see that whatever you could get through straightforward calculation for the simple case is also borne out by stability analysis. It is unstable for this particular situation. Okay, but you can stabilize it. So let us say I had a gain k1 here. Okay, a controller, a feedback controller is used of gain not just equal to unity. Then what will happen to this curve? So if you notice here, k1 will amplify. If I take any complex number here, k1 times a complex number has the same phase, but it's amplified by a factor k1, right? So therefore, the Nyquist plot of k1 by s plus s minus 2 will be similar to the Nyquist plot of 1 by s minus 2 itself, but it will be amplified by a certain factor. So it will look something like this. Okay, so if I choose the gain k1 to be high enough, you see that I will end up encircling the point -1 in the counterclockwise sense. Or in other words, the number of encirclements will be equal to -1. So for high enough values of k, therefore, our closed loop system is going to be stable, because in such a situation, the number of encirclements is -1, the number of poles is also equal to 1, and therefore z will be equal to 0. Any questions about this? Okay. So the last transfer function, which is again a stable transfer function, p of s is equal to 1 by s plus 1 times s plus 2 times s plus 3. Okay. So here, I shall just directly substitute s is equal to j omega. So p of j omega is equal to 1 by j omega plus 1 times j omega plus 2 times j omega plus 3. Okay. It's not very difficult to draw this. So each of these is a cascade of 3 transfer functions: 1 by j omega plus 1, 1 by j omega plus 2, 1 by j omega plus 3. Each of them have their phases going from 0 to -90 degrees, as we saw in the previous example. The first example we took was 1 by s plus 1, and the phase went from 0 to -90 degrees as omega went from 0 to infinity. The same thing is going to happen to the other 2 terms also. So the overall phase of this is going to be a sum of the phases of each of these terms, and therefore that's going to go from 0 to -270 degrees. Okay, so around omega equal to 0, the magnitude is 1 by 6. Okay, and as omega tends to infinity, the magnitude monotonically reduces, and the phase goes from 0 to -270 degrees. So the curve will look something like this. Okay, You can compute where it crosses the imaginary axis and so on. So P of j omega can be written as, I think 6 omega square minus 6 or some such thing. I don't remember now. Plus j times 11 omega minus omega square. Okay, some such. I'm not very sure about the signs of these things. No, minus 6 omega square plus 6 and 11 omega minus omega cube. Sorry. Okay. So the imaginary crossing can be obtained by setting the real part to 0, and the real crossings can be obtained by setting the imaginary part to 0. Okay, and that's what gives you that the magnitude of P of j omega when it crosses the imaginary axis is 1 by I don't know. No, sorry, I don't 1 by 10, and the magnitude of P of j omega when it crosses the real axis is 1 by 60. And the imaginary axis crossing happens at omega equal to 1. The real axis crossing happens at omega equal to 0, which is already here, and omega equal to square root of 11. Okay. And the point minus 1 is here. Okay. So let us focus on this one particular example. The other part of the Nyquist plot is a complex conjugate of it for omega going from minus infinity to 0. So we often don't even draw that. We just stop with drawing the Nyquist plot only for the positive frequencies, not for the negative frequencies, because for negative frequencies the curve will not look any different. It's just going to be a reflection of the first curve about the real axis. Okay. Now this curve, of course, does not encircle the point minus 1, and is also stable. The plant is also stable, and therefore we can conclude that a closed loop system with this particular plant and the controller gain being equal to 1 is going to be a stable closed loop system. Okay, but let us say I bring in this gain K1 and I try to increase it, because my high gain is what gives me all the benefits of feedback. So I am not interested in keeping the gain K1 anywhere close to 1, right? I want it to be as high as possible. The higher the value of the feedback gain, the better is my disturbance rejection, the better is my robustness to plant parameter variations, etc., etc. Okay, so I want to make gain K1 very large. Okay, so for example, in the in the previous class we saw that we wanted a gain of 100. Okay, what will happen if my plant had this particular structure and the gain K1 was 100? Will my closed loop system still be stable or not? This was the reason why we started looking at Nyquist plots, because we know from the point of view of performance our gain K1 has to be 100, but what about from the point of view of stability? So what happens to this curve when we multiply it with a gain K1? You notice from the discussion that we had for the previous case that this entire curve gets scaled up by a factor of K1. So if I take any complex number here, which is P of j omega, some arbitrary P of j omega, that complex number will get scaled up, or in other words, the phase is going to remain the same. The magnitude increases by a factor K1. Okay, so the Nyquist plot of the amplified, open loop system K1 times P is going to look something like this. Similar to the first curve, but stretched out, scaled up. That's all. Okay, but what you see here, however, is reasons for concern, because earlier the Nyquist plot was crossing the real axis at 1 by 60. Now it will start to cross the real axis at this minus 1 by 60, because it's on a negative real axis. It will start to cross minus K1 by 60. Okay, so if my gain K1 becomes equal to 60 or slightly higher, then you see that this curve will start to cross the real axis to the left hand side of the point minus 1, the critical point. Okay, and if I were to draw its complex conjugate, you would see that that would contribute to 2 encirclements, 2 clockwise encirclements of the critical point, which means that you will have a pair of unstable poles for your closed loop system. Okay, so the highest value of gain K that I can have in my physical, I have as part of the system is at most equal to 60. K1 max. Okay. For any larger value of gain K1, my closed loop system is going to become unstable. Any questions about this conclusion? Okay, that's good to know. So it is clear that the system is going to become unstable for gain K1 greater than 60. But my boss wants me to reject the disturbance by a factor of 100. So if I were to blithely put a factor of 100 here, although on a piece of paper I seem to be accomplishing the control, the performance requirements, I will have an unstable system on my hands, as revealed by the Nyquist plot. Okay, so here therefore at last is a very nice tool which allows me to keep track of both performance as well as stability. Okay, I can tell whether my system is going to be stable or not by looking at whether the Nyquist plot crosses the point, encircles the point -1 or not. Okay, but this also gives me an important pointer. In this case, I will be disappointing my boss a little bit, because for a gain of 100, my closed loop system is going to be unstable. So I have to go back to my boss and tell him or her, look, I know you want a 100-fold attenuation in disturbance, but with this simple proportional controller, it is not possible to accomplish it without destabilizing the whole feedback system. Okay, what do you do? How do you salvage the situation? Well, one possible way out is to pay attention to the frequency content of the disturbance T that you want to attenuate. Suppose your disturbance is a low frequency disturbance, or in other words, when I say low frequency, I'm talking of frequencies much less than this particular frequency at which the real axis crossing happens. In this case, it is around square root of 11, which is 3 point something, right? Suppose your disturbance frequency is much less than that frequency. So it is somewhere here. The disturbance frequency is, starts maybe at 0 and ends at 0.1 radians per second or some such thing. Okay. Then do you agree with me that to reject this disturbance whose frequency content is significant only till 0.1 radian per second, I don't need to keep the gain K1 100 at other frequencies also? Why should I keep it greater than 100 for frequencies of 1 radian per second, 2 radians per second, 3 radians per second, and so on? I need to keep it 100 only till 0.1 radians per second. After that, my system is not even experiencing any disturbance. The frequency content of the disturbance tapers off after 0.1 radian per second. So why am I wasting precious resources by keeping this gain high for frequencies beyond 0.1 radian per second? I might as well reduce the gain, right? Because I see that there are real problems with keeping the gain high for frequencies greater than 1 or 2 radians per second. Then my closed loop system is going to be unstable. So if I want to have the cake and eat it too, or in other words, if I want to keep the job and satisfy my boss, what I need to do is I have to make sure that the gain K1 is close to 100 in the frequency range where the disturbance D is significant, where the frequency content of the disturbance is significant. But the moment I am past that upper limit of the frequency up to which the disturbance possesses some significant frequency content, I can taper down my gain. I can greatly reduce my gain so that hopefully the gain, the Nyquist plot avoids the point -1 entirely. Okay, so if I were to simply use a proportional controller, it is simple, that is great, but the disadvantage is that it scales up every part of the Nyquist plot by the same fraction, especially those parts that will contribute to instability of the feedback system. So I can be canny, instead I can be clever. Instead of scaling up every part of the curve, I can scale up only those parts of the curve where performance is required. So in this case, it's between 0 and 0.1 radians per second. And on other parts of the curve, I can make sure that this gain K1 is not as large as it was in this particular frequency range between 0 and 0.1, but it's much smaller. Okay, or in other words, I should make this gain K as a function of omega. Okay, so this is a dynamic controller. So when can the gain K be a function of omega? When it's itself a linear system which exhibits dynamics, right? So in such a situation, I can not only make sure that my system is stable, but also make sure that the gain in the desired frequency range was as high as I wanted it to be. So it satisfies both stability requirements as well as performance requirements. Any questions about our decision to go with a dynamic controller vis-a-vis a static controller? A static controller is one which doesn't have any dynamic. It's just a pure amplifier. The benefit of that is it's extremely simple in its appearance. So we understand how to, it's just, there's nothing that one needs to do to understand how the Nyquist plot of K1 times P will look like. It's just a scaled version of P. Whereas if you have a dynamic controller, we need to plot K1 of j omega times P of j omega. Okay. And then make sure that this product is greater than 100 in the frequency range where we want a disturbance to be rejected by a factor of 100. And then, but the product also is attenuated quickly at higher frequencies, so that at the frequency where the real axis is crossed, the value of the gain K1 times P is less than 1. And the point -1 is not encircled. Any questions about this? Okay. So you see, therefore, that the Nyquist plot already suggests to us ways to tweak our design approach. Nyquist plot is telling us that don't go with a simple controller, even though your laziness and your desire for simplicity might prompt you to do so. Go with a dynamic controller because it is better. It helps you take care simultaneously of performance as well as stability. With a proportional controller, either you're going to lose your job or you're going to lose your increment. One of the two is going to happen. If you choose a gain of 100, you're going to lose your job because your system is going to be unstable. If you choose a gain of 60, so that you're not going to encircle the point -1, you're going to disappoint your boss and you're not going to get promoted. Okay, but by going with a dynamic controller, you can not only keep your job, but you can also get promoted. Okay, you can satisfy both stability and performance requirements. As nice as this tool is, because it helps you to quantifiably reject disturbances while achieving stability, there is a small problem with it. These curves that I have drawn here are not intuitive curves. Okay, they are complicated. They are not like they don't have simple mathematical expressions and so on and so forth. So to graphically draw them is a pain. Okay. Now, not only should I draw the curve for P of j omega and K1 of j omega, what I'm interested in is this actual curve, K1 times P. Okay. Now it turns out that the polar plot of K1 times P can look very different from the polar plot of K1 alone and the polar plot of P alone. Okay. So if I were to draw the Nyquist plots of P and K1, the Nyquist plot of the product will not at all look like the Nyquist plot of either of them. Okay. So these curves are non-intuitive. So if I'm a control designer, what am I doing as a control designer? I would be playing around with the structure of this K1 of j omega. The controller structure I'll be playing. What I wish to see is very quickly, okay, I change the structure. How will the system look like? How will the Nyquist plot look like? Is it still stable or has it become unstable? I want to quickly check that, right? But to quickly check that, I need to take the product and then draw this polar plot all over again. I cannot use the previous polar plot of the previous, controller structure. I have to do it all over again. So that practical difficulty of having to, imagine K1 times P is a big stumbling block for this particular tool. Okay. So this problem is addressed by the next tool, namely the Bode plot. Okay. The Bode plot does away with this problem by instead, representing log of magnitude versus as function of log of frequency and the phase of this transfer function K1 times P as function of frequency. Why is that done? That is done because it converts a product operation into an addition operation, because log of a product is the addition of the logs of the individual terms, right? So it converts a product operation into an addition operation. An addition operation is very intuitive, very easy and clear for us to imagine. Okay. So let us therefore briefly look at what is done. So Bode plots. Okay. So they refer to two plots. The first plot is plot 1, is 20 log to the base 10 of magnitude of k1 times p versus log omega. Okay, that's the first plot. Now the plot 2 is angle of k1 times p versus log omega. Okay, let us look at each of these carefully. So the y-axis for the first plot is 20 log magnitude of k1 times p. Okay, why is there this 20 here? Why is it log to the base 10 and log to the base e? These things go back to the days of telephony. I talked about how feedback control systems were intimately and intricately linked with the development of telephony, right? So people in the telephony business are used to talking of decibels, are used to talking of the relative levels of our voice. Okay, so 20 log to the base 10, some pressure, relative pressure, is representative of the decibel loudness of that particular voice. So therefore that has also crept into this definition here, but this is just a dummy term, 20. Okay, log to the base 10 again as a consequence of its connection with audio amplification. Okay, why is it log? It is log because log of mod of k1 times p is equal to log of mod of k1 plus log of mod of p. Okay, so if I have drawn the Bode plot of p and the Bode plot of k1, because I need to only add the two in order to predict, in order to obtain the Bode plot of k1 times p, addition is a very intuitive operation. I can easily imagine how the addition of two things might look like, although it's a lot harder for me to imagine how the multiplication of two things would look like, especially if those two things are two complex numbers, right? So by converting a multiplication operation to an addition operation, it becomes very easy for the control designer to quickly make changes to the structure of k1 and anticipate how that would affect the the Bode plot of k1 times p. Okay, so this is the reason why the y-axis is log of magnitude of the open loop transfer function. The second plot's y-axis is the phase of k1 times p, and if you can the phase of k1 times p is simply equal to the phase of k1 plus the phase of p. You can easily see that because I can write k1 times p as magnitude of k1 e to the power minus e to the power j angle of k1, and the plant as I can magnitude of plant e to the power j angle of plant. So you can see that the magnitudes are multiplied. Okay, magnitude of k1 times p is magnitude of k1 times magnitude of p, and the phase of k1 times p is the phase of k1 plus the phase of p. Okay, so the same addition operation also exists when I'm drawing the phase plot, and that is why once again, since it's addition, I would go with the phase of k1 times p and not the log of the phase or some such thing. Now the second thing is, why is the x-axis log of frequency and not just linear frequency? I shall just discuss the reason for that and I will stop today's lecture. Okay, let us take a certain simple transfer function. Okay, p of s is equal to 1 by s plus 1. So if I have to draw its Nyquist plot, p of j omega will be equal to 1 by j omega plus 1. And to draw that, I need to know its magnitude and its phase. So the magnitude is 1 by 1 plus omega square, and the phase is tan inverse omega by 1. Okay. Now what is a log of magnitude of p? I'll forget the factor 20 for the moment. Okay. What is that equal to? Log of 1 by square root of 1 plus omega square. And that's equal to 1 by 2 times or minus 1 by 2 times log of 1 plus omega square. Now, you see that for omega much less than 1, omega square is much less than 1, and therefore 1 plus omega square is roughly equal to 1 itself. And therefore, log of magnitude of p is roughly equal to minus 1 by 2 log of 1, which is equal to 0. Okay, so for all values of omega less than 1, the magnitude of p is going to be 0. So this curve is going to be flat, p as function of frequency. Whereas when omega is much greater than 1, then 1 plus omega square is roughly equal to omega square itself. So that you would have the magnitude of p, log of magnitude of p, to be equal to minus 1 by 2 times log of omega square, which is equal to minus log of omega. Now this tells you why the x-axis is log omega. Okay, because when I plot the graph for much larger values of omega than 1, then log omega versus log p will be a straight line of slope equal to minus 1. Okay, if on the other hand I am multiplying this with a factor 20 to represent it in a decibel scale, then the slope will be equal to minus 20. So if I were to draw the Bode plot for this, for omega much less than minus 1, the plot is 0 dB. Okay, it is flat. For omega much greater than minus 1, the plot is a straight line of slope minus 1 if I did not have the factor 20 here, or other words, the slope is minus 20. And it is customary to represent the slope in this case by the term 20 decibels per decade. Decade represents 1 order of magnitude of frequency. So what this says is that if I were to increase the frequency by a factor 10, the gain is going to drop by a factor of 20 decibels. Okay, and if I were to extrapolate these two curves, they will meet at the point omega equal to 1. Okay, and this point omega equal to 1 is called as a corner frequency. So why are we choosing the x-axis to be log omega is evident here. It's because if I were to choose the x-axis to be log omega, in this particular case at least I see that the curve will look like a pair of straight lines. There will not be some complicated curves of the kind that Nyquist plots were. Okay, these will simply be a pair of straight lines, which are far more easy for me to imagine. Now, if I had one more term, let us say 1 by s times s plus 1. This was a transfer function that we considered earlier, right? So 1 by s is 1 by j omega, right? The magnitude is 1 by omega. So it's going to be a straight line that's passing through omega equal to 1. By the way, the origin of the Bode plot is not omega equal to 0. The origin of the Bode plot, since it is log omega equal to 0 corresponds to omega equal to 1. So omega equal to 0 is somewhere here at close to minus infinity actually. Okay, 20 log magnitude of p. Let us focus on only the first term, 1 over s. So 1 over j omega has a magnitude of minus log omega, minus 20 log omega. So it's going to be a straight line. Magnitude of log, put it this way, 20 log magnitude of 1 over j omega is equal to minus 20 log omega. Okay, and the magnitude plot of 1 by s plus 1, we already drew that, right? So it was something like this, right? So what is the magnitude plot of 1 by s plus 1 times here 1 by s? Since we are taking the logarithm of this product, it's going to be the addition of these two plots, right? So I can add these two plots in a fairly straightforward manner. So from omega equal to 0 to omega equal to 1, the slope is going to be minus 20 dB per decade, and that is dominated by this 1 over s term here. And beyond omega equal to 1, the slope is going to be doubled, because this has a slope of minus 20 dB per decade, that also has a slope of minus 20 dB per decade. Slope is going to be therefore minus 40 dB per decade. Okay, so the Bode plot therefore of a higher order system is also going to be a pair of straight lines or a set of straight lines. Okay, and the corner frequency is again going to be equal to 1. Okay, more generally you can show that by choosing the x-axis to be log omega instead of linear omega, even for a more general transfer function p of s, which is a ratio of two polynomials, even for that, the Bode plot is going to only be a set of broken straight lines. And the points where these straight lines break or change slope are the corner frequencies of the open loop system. Okay, so it is for this reason, the simplicity in viewing this, in visualizing it, that we go with the Bode plot. Okay, we choose the x-axis to be log so that they look like straight lines. We choose a y-axis to be log so that we can add the Bode plot of a controller to the Bode plot of the plant. Okay, so if I have a certain Bode plot for the controller, I just need to add that to this, and that also is going to be a set of broken straight lines. So therefore, I can easily imagine how the summation of two broken straight lines is going to look like. Okay, much more than how the product of two complex numbers drawn in a polar plot would look like, as I would have to do in the case of a Nyquist plot. Okay, that's the reason for adopting Bode plots. Okay, so what we shall do in the next lecture is, I shall just label this as log omega. This is 20 log magnitude of P of j omega. Okay, so I shall take up a concrete design example and see how we can use Bode plots to execute the design. Okay, we'll stop at this point. Are there any questions? Okay, I don't see any questions, so I shall log off at this point. Thank you very much.